You reach a certain age, and you start to believe you've seen it all. The betrayals, the small compromises, the way life sands down your sharp edges until you're just smooth enough to get by without too much friction. Part 1, you reach a certain age, and you start to believe you've seen it all. The betrayals, the small compromises, the way life sands down your sharp edges until you're just smooth enough to get by without too much friction. I was 58. I'd put in my 35 years at the firm, collected my gold watch and my pension, and settled into a quiet, predictable life. The kind of life where the biggest decision of the day is whether to mow the lawn before or after lunch. I was comfortable, I was bored, and I was lonely. Then I met Elena. It was at a charity auction for the local art museum. She was volunteering, handing out programs with a smile that could disarm a bomb squad. She was 42, full of energy, with laugh lines around her eyes that suggested a life well lived. She made me feel seen, not as a retired accountant, not as a walking pension fund, but as a man. We talked about travel, about jazz, about her dream of opening a small gallery one day. It felt real. It felt like a second chance I'd stopped believing in. 6 months later, I proposed. We were on a weekend trip to the coast, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and violet. I got down on one knee, my old bones creaking a protest, and presented her with my mother's diamond ring. The look on her face, it wasn't just happiness, it was triumph, a deep, shining victory in her eyes that I mistook for pure joy. She said yes. She threw her arms around me, and I felt like the king of the world. The wedding planning began almost immediately. Elena wanted the works. The historic ballroom downtown, the 5-piece band, the 7-tier cake, the designer dress flown in from Milan. I didn't blink. Why would I? This was the woman I was going to spend the rest of my life with. My savings, my comfortable nest egg, it was our money now. I transferred funds, signed checks, watched the numbers in my account slowly, steadily dwindle. She had a notebook, a beautiful leather-bound thing where she tracked every detail, every vendor, every deposit. She was so meticulous, so organized. I admired her for it. It was that very organization that started the unraveling. She'd asked me to get a copy of my birth certificate from my safety deposit box for the marriage license. A few days later, she left her precious wedding planner notebook open on the kitchen counter. Next to a list of floral arrangements was a sticky note with a reminder for herself. Pick up certified copy of marriage license from county clerk under maiden name. Under maiden name. The phrase was a small, cold stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. Why would she need a certified copy of a marriage license? We hadn't gotten one yet. We were applying for it next week. I stood there in my own kitchen, the morning sun streaming in, and felt the first crack form in my new perfect world. It was a whisper of wrongness, a dissonant chord in our happy symphony. I pushed the feeling down. I made excuses for her. Maybe it was for a friend. Maybe it was an old note, but the seed was planted. A few days later, under the guise of needing to find a tax document, I went into her home office, the one I'd helped her set up, the one where I'd paid for the beautiful oak desk. I told myself I was being paranoid, an old fool, but my fingers, the same ones that had meticulously balanced ledgers for decades, felt compelled to search. It wasn't in the filing cabinet. It wasn't in her desk drawers. It was tucked away in a small locked firebox on the top shelf of her closet, a box I'd never seen before. The key was in the hollowed-out base of a small jade elephant on her bookshelf, a hiding place so cliché it was almost an insult. My heart was a hammer in my chest as I turned the key. Inside, there were no love letters, no old diaries, just documents, neat, clinical, and damning. And there it was. A certified marriage license issued 2 years prior. Her name, her face, smiling next to a man I had never seen before. The license was from 2 states over. It was current. There was no record of an annulment, no record of a divorce. She was married. She had been married the entire time I had known her. I sat on the floor of her closet, surrounded by her clothes, the scent of her perfume in the air, and the paper trembling in my hands. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculation. Every smile, every touch, every whispered promise about our future. It had all been a performance. I wasn't her fiancé. I was her mark. And the wedding we were planning. It wasn't the beginning of our life together. It was the final act of her con, the moment she would legally get her hands on everything I had left. The rage didn't come yet. That would come later. First, there was just a vast, hollowing cold. The chilling realization that the happiest chapter of my late life was a lie meticulously crafted by the woman sleeping in my bed. The game was on, but she didn't know that the rules had just changed. Part 2, I placed the marriage license back in the firebox exactly as I'd found it. I returned the key to the jade elephant. I wiped the faint smudges from the box's surface with the cuff of my shirt. And then I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. The routine of it, the scooping of grounds, the gurgle of the machine, was an anchor in a world that had just fallen away beneath my feet. Elena came downstairs, yawning, wrapped in the silk robe I'd bought her for her birthday. She kissed my cheek. Her lips felt like a brand. "Morning, my love," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. "My love." The words curdled in the air between us. I handed her a mug. "Morning," I managed, my own voice sounding like it belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't just died a little inside. The next few days were an exercise in psychological torture. I had to perform the role of the happy, doting fiancé while my mind screamed in silence. I watched her now with a forensic eye. I saw the subtle calculations behind her affection, the way she'd steer conversations back to finances, to the wedding fund, to the future. She'd talk about the gallery she wanted to open, how it would be our legacy, her eyes gleaming with a possessiveness I'd once mistaken for passion. I'd nod, I'd smile, I'd agree to another transfer of funds for the caterer's final payment. Every check I signed felt like I was signing my own death warrant, but it was also a piece of evidence, a receipt for my own humiliation. I started digging, quietly, methodically. The skills I'd honed over a lifetime of auditing financial records were now turned to auditing the ruins of my own life. Late at night, while she slept, I was at my computer in the den, the screen's blue glow my only companion. Public records searches in counties with names I'd never heard before. Social media deep dives into friends of friends on her private accounts. It was like assembling a ghastly jigsaw puzzle. I found him, her husband. His name was Robert. He lived 3 hours away, a quiet, unassuming man who worked as a high school teacher. His social media was a ghost town, but his sister's page was public. There were pictures. A backyard barbecue from 8 months ago. Elena was in one of them, standing slightly apart from the group, a strained smile on her face. The caption read, "So glad my brother and his wife could make it." The casual confirmation was a physical blow. And then I found the others. It wasn't just Robert. It was a pattern, a trail of financial devastation left in her wake. a retired dentist in Florida who had loaned her $60,000 for a business venture that never materialized. A widowed real estate developer in Arizona who had funded a lavish engagement before she suddenly disappeared, leaving him with a non-refundable venue deposit for a wedding that never happened. The stories were all the same. A vulnerable older man with money, a whirlwind romance, a financial drain carefully orchestrated followed by a disappearance. I wasn't her first. I was just her most ambitious target. She was going for the whole pot this time, the marriage, the legal claim to my assets, the complete and total liquidation of a lifetime of work. The rage finally came then. It didn't boil over, it solidified. It became a cold, dense core inside me, heavier than any grief. I thought about confronting her. I imagined the scene, the screaming, the tears, the slammed doors. It would be satisfying for a moment, but it would also be her victory. She'd pack her bags, take whatever she could carry, and vanish to find her next victim. She'd leave me standing in the wreckage, a laughingstock, financially and emotionally gutted. No, a simple confrontation was what she expected. It was the exit strategy built into her con. I wouldn't give it to her. The turning point came on a Tuesday. We were supposed to be finalizing the seating chart. She had the diagram spread out on the table, her finger tracing the names of people I barely knew, her friends, her family. They were probably just more actors in her play. She looked up at me, all wide-eyed innocence. "We need to transfer the final payment to the venue tomorrow, sweetheart. It's the last big one. The last big one, the final extraction." She was so close to the finish line she could taste it. And in that moment, looking at her triumphant, greedy face, the plan was born. It wasn't enough to just stop her. I had to make her understand. I had to make her feel the same profound, public powerlessness she had inflicted on me and God knows how many others. The humiliation had to be hers. My revenge wouldn't be a knife in the dark. It would be a mirror. I would use her own stage, her own script, her own audience. The wedding rehearsal. Everyone would be there. My few remaining friends, her circle of enablers, and with a little careful manipulation, one very special, uninvited guest. I started to plan not like a heartbroken man, but like the accountant I was. I itemized her deceit. I gathered documents, printed emails, saved bank statements. I created a ledger of her lies. And I made a single, anonymous phone call to a man named Robert, inviting him to what I promised would be a very enlightening event concerning his wife. His confusion was palpable, but his curiosity was piqued. The pieces were on the board. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to make my move. The game was indeed on, and for the first time since I'd found that firebox, I felt a sliver of something other than cold despair. I felt the grim, quiet focus of a man with nothing left to lose, and a perfect, devastating checkmate in mind. Part 3. The day of the rehearsal arrived, draped in the kind of perfect, sunny weather she would have called a good omen. I dressed carefully, selecting the suit she'd always said made me look distinguished. I looked at myself in the mirror, a man playing a part just as she was, but my performance would have a very different final act. The historic ballroom was already set up for tomorrow's non-event. Chairs were lined in neat rows, a makeshift altar stood at the front, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air, paid for with my money, arranged for her fiction. Our guests began to arrive, my small, genuine circle of friends looking happy for me. Her larger, more boisterous group, their laughter just a little too loud. And then, slipping in quietly at the back, was Robert. I saw him find a seat in the last row, his face a mask of confusion and dawning anxiety. He'd come. The final piece was in place. Elena was radiant. She floated between our guests, playing the blushing bride to perfection, her hand constantly finding mine, her touch now feeling like the brush of a spider's web. She was counting the minutes until she was irrevocably tied to my finances. The wedding planner called us to the front to begin walking through the ceremony. We took our places. The officiant, a jovial man we'd met once, began reciting the generic script. Elena looked at me, her eyes shining with what I now knew was avarice, not love. This was her moment of triumph. It was time to rewrite the ending. I gently extracted my hand from hers. The movement was small, but it broke the rhythm of the rehearsal. A slight frown touched her lips. I took a small step forward, turning to face the small assembly of 40-odd people. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out not a ring but a slim, black remote. I clicked it once. The large monitor at the side of the room, which was supposed to show a slideshow of our happy photos tomorrow, flickered to life. The first image that appeared was the certified copy of her marriage license to Robert. A collective, sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Elena's face went from confused to ashen in half a second. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke calmly, clearly, my words cutting through the stunned silence like a scalpel. I explained that the woman standing beside me in her wedding dress was already legally married. I clicked the remote again. A collage of documents appeared. Bank statements showing the transfers to her personal account, the police reports from the retired dentist in Florida, the canceled venue contract from the developer in Arizona. I laid out her pattern, her methodology, her trail of ruined lives. I spoke of the calculated affection, the engineered vulnerability, the predatory patience. I was no longer a jilted lover. I was a prosecutor presenting an airtight case. I saw the understanding dawn on the faces of my friends, shock turning to pity, then to anger on my behalf. I saw the horror on the faces of her so-called friends, some of whom were likely complicit, now scrambling to distance themselves. Then I turned my gaze to the back of the room. "And this," I said, my voice still chillingly even, "is Robert, her husband." All heads swiveled. Robert stood up, his face a storm of betrayal and humiliation. He wasn't a vengeful man. He was a wounded one. He looked at Elena, and the look on his face was the final, brutal nail in the coffin of her performance. The perfect, public collapse of her entire fabricated world was complete. There were no screams, no dramatic outbursts from her. She just stood there, utterly exposed, her beautiful dress suddenly looking like a costume in a play that had just been canceled. The silence in the room was absolute, and in that silence her guilt was deafening. The aftermath was swift and satisfyingly clinical. The wedding was, of course, canceled. I had already secured a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. Using the evidence I had meticulously gathered, we filed a civil suit. Every dollar I had spent on the wedding, every loan, every gift that could be traced was reclaimed. The prenuptial agreement I'd had her sign, which she'd thought was a mere formality, became an ironclad barrier. Furthermore, Robert, now armed with the truth, filed for divorce on the grounds of fraud. The district attorney's office, presented with the pattern of crimes across state lines, opened a criminal investigation. The last I heard, she faced charges of grand larceny and bigamy. Her game was over, and the consequences were no longer just emotional. They were legal, financial, and inescapable. In the quiet that followed, I learned several things about myself. I learned that the calm, methodical man I had been my whole life wasn't weak. He was a reservoir of immense strength. I learned that trust is not a blanket to be given freely, but a lantern to be carried carefully, its light shown only where it is earned. The experience didn't make me bitter, it made me clear-eyed. It carved out the soft, gullible parts of me and left behind something harder, wiser, and more resilient. The satisfaction wasn't in her downfall, but in the restoration of my own agency. I had taken the narrative she had written for me, the foolish old man, and I had rewritten it with a cold, deliberate hand. I sold the house, the one filled with the ghosts of her performance. I moved to a smaller place by the water. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evenings, the same way I used to before I met her, but the silence feels different now. It's not the silence of loneliness, but of peace. It's the quiet of a balance sheet that has been settled, of a debt called in and paid in full. The world moves on. So do I. I look out at the horizon where the sky meets the sea, a vast, untroubled expanse, and I feel no regret, only the solid, unshakable truth of a lesson learned and a justice quietly and poetically delivered. The chapter is closed. The ledger is balanced, and I am, finally, free. Have you ever discovered that someone wasn't who they claimed to be? What would you do if your entire world turned out to be a carefully constructed lie?